Hello, I will be presenting preparing for influenza season. What is influenza? Influenza, or the flu, is an illness that affects the throat, nose, and sometimes lungs. Symptoms can be mild or severe, at times leading to hospitalization and even death. Thousands of influenza deaths occur each year. As you can see from this graph here, from 2009 to 2017, influenza caused more than 40,000 deaths per year. The best way to prevent the flu is by vaccination. In the United States, there is a season when more people suffer from the flu than usual. Some people, particularly those in vulnerable populations, become hospitalized. Hospitals and clinics need additional staff to treat these patients. The goal of this project is to determine for a medical staffing agency when and where to send this additional staff. Who is vulnerable? The CDC considers children under the age of 5, adults 65 and over, pregnant women, and those suffering from chronic conditions such as HIV, AIDS, cancer, and heart disease as vulnerable. For this study, the vulnerable population is defined as those under the age of 5 and 65 plus years old. This graph depicts the number of influenza deaths in the vulnerable population versus the non-vulnerable population. The number of influenza deaths in the vulnerable population is significantly larger than the number of deaths in the non-vulnerable population. In addition, as the total vulnerable population increases, so does the number of influenza deaths. Where are the most vulnerable places? Here we have a map of the United States that depicts both the total vulnerable population and total influenza deaths. The total vulnerable population is represented by shades of blue. The darker the shade, the larger the total vulnerable population. Total influenza deaths is represented by orange circles. The larger and darker the circle, the larger the total number of influenza deaths. We see that the same states that have the largest vulnerable populations also have the largest number of influenza deaths. Here is a closer look at those most vulnerable places. When are people most vulnerable? Here we have a graph depicting the number of influenza deaths by month and year from January 2009 to December 2017. As you can see, the number of deaths greatly varies depending on time of year. Here we have a graph depicting the number of influenza deaths by month, and see that the number of deaths generally starts to increase in September, peaking in January, begins to decrease in March, and reaches its lowest in August. From this data, it is recommended that the medical staffing agency prioritize California, Texas, Florida, New York, and Pennsylvania, and that they begin sending out additional staff to these areas in September and begin withdrawing them in March. A future study could determine the effects of vaccination on vulnerable populations and total number of deaths. Other future studies could also observe the effects of vaccine accessibility and perceived effectiveness on vaccination rates. Thank you.